For more perspective on the developments underway in Egypt, we have the executive editor of Bloomberg View with us, Jamie Rubin. You also know him as former Assistant Secretary of State under President Bill Clinton. Welcome back to the show.
Nice to be with you, Margaret.
Since we last spoke on Friday, this situation seems only to have heated up rather than died down. What is your sense of the White House response, the president's address, and what we've heard from the State Department?
Well, I think it took them several days to get this thing right. The early days, they couldn't decide how strongly to support the need for change, democratic change on the ground, talking about a stable government, talking about the friendship with the Mubarak family and all that stuff. But I think finally Secretary Clinton and President Obama have got this about right, namely publicly calling for an orderly transition, making clear that President Mubarak's days are numbered. The question is just how many days there are, and calling on the military very clearly to not use military force. And importantly, the latest development is to have top officials been calling from our military to their military. These are people who work together very closely over the last decades. We've provided enormous amounts of military equipment and training, exercises. So they know each other real well. And having our military officers really communicate very strongly to their counterparts that cracking down with the use of force is just not on is critical, because it is that decision by the military that will determine how this thing ends.
Is the appointment of a Vice President Suleiman, a holding pattern? I mean, does Mubarak end up on the ballot in September?
I think it is a holding pattern. I think it's not really very meaningful when it comes to what the people on the street want. It seems to me this is a resolvable situation if President Mubarak realizes that, that's it. This is his last term in office, and that his son is not going to be on the ballot in September.
You've met the Vice President.
I have met Suleiman. I've also met Mohamed ElBaradei many, many times. It was under the Clinton administration that he was selected for his big job at the IAEA, the Atomic Energy Agency, from which he got the Nobel Peace Prize. And I think it's important that he have a role. And the reason for that is because he's not an anti-American. One of the reasons we picked him, in fact, and supported his selection as IAEA head is that he had lived in New York, gone to school in New York, was a Knicks fan. So this is not an anti-American figure. On the other hand, he has support in the region on the ground to a degree because he took an independent stance during the Iraq War. So with ElBaradei playing this transitional role, you could imagine President Mubarak saying, okay, no term in office beyond September. Now that's only 8 months from now. So we basically have to get from here to September in such a way that the military doesn't feel the need to respond to growing protests. And I think that's what this million-man march to tomorrow is about, is to put more pressure on Mubarak to go.
Right, and talking about that march, I mean, you could look at this and say that the message has been don't underweight public opinion in the streets of Cairo. This is tremendously important. So can the administration continue to walk a line there? I mean, should they go as far as to publicly call support, not for Mubarak, but for the people in the streets?
Yes,
I mean, do you have a lesser role going forward if you don't come out now and support
I think we've already lost a lot of steam with the people on the streets, and one of the reasons for that is because we made a decision to have our critique of President Mubarak's human rights policy, his democratic values policy, the arrests, the crackdowns. We made all that private. And so the people who are living in Egypt had no idea the United States was working to try to change Mubarak's practices on human rights and democratic values. And that's one of the risks of keeping things too private. And I think we saw, as for example, when some of these cables came out about what was going on behind the scenes, you learned that the U.S. government was doing what it should do, which is to push Mubarak for change. The final issue is, how do you avoid being perceived as letting an ally go down the drain? And that's a tough one.
Jamie, we're going to have to check back in with you. Thank you for coming on.